Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I bring you a video about the story of James and Diep. The afternoon descended very slowly over the small house, so slowly that the last streaks of sunlight seemed to linger on the wall faded by time. The light gradually dimmed, the space growing quieter, with only the chill seeping through the cracks of the old wooden door. A gentle breeze carried the lingering scent of kitchen smoke, mixed with the smell of dry firewood still burning. The crackling of the wood sounded steadily, not loud, but enough to keep the little house from falling into complete silence. Diep bent over the stove, her hands moving deftly as she stoked the fire. She blew softly, brushed away the ash, each familiar motion repeated countless times before. From time to time, she glanced over at Nee sitting close by, her tiny body curled up against the late-day cold. The child held her small hands near the fire, rubbing them together to find a bit of warmth. The glow of the flames lit up her young face, warming her cheeks to a rosy hue, her clear eyes reflecting the flickering light. Diep paused for a moment, lowering her voice, soft and slow, careful not to disturb the quiet. "Do you want some more cake?" It was a simple question, unhurried and gentle. Nee looked up and shook her head lightly. She set the half-eaten cake aside, answering with a polite, obedient look. Then, as if remembering something, she pulled her schoolbag closer, took out her books, and placed them neatly in front of her, following what Diep had told her earlier that afternoon. The letters in the book were still clumsy, the strokes uneven. Some words came out hesitant and incomplete. Nee sounded them out slowly, sometimes stopping, frowning as she tried to remember. Diep sat down beside her, never showing impatience. She leaned closer, pointed to each line, patiently correcting every word, guiding each sentence. Sometimes they had to read it 2 or 3 times, sometimes Diep had to pause and explain with the simplest, easiest words. For Diep, moments by the stove like this were more than just study time. They were precious moments she tried to preserve for Nee, something ordinary, something fitting for her age. Amid scarcity and a life full of hardship, Diep did not want Nee's childhood to slip away too quickly, did not want her to grow up knowing only exhaustion and worry. She believed that as long as there were simple lessons like these, as long as letters were read aloud in the flickering firelight, that childhood had not been forgotten. When the lesson ended, Nee rubbed her eyes, her voice growing softer as she asked permission to go to bed. Diep nodded, closed the book, and carefully put the notebooks back into the bag. She stood up and lifted Nee, feeling how light and thin the child was in her arms. Laying her down on the bed, Diep pulled the blanket up and adjusted it to keep out the cold. Her hands lingered a moment longer, as if trying to hold on to the warmth for the child through the chilly night. Night had fully fallen. Outside, the wind grew stronger, gently rattling the door. Inside the small room, the dim glow of an oil lamp cast light onto the ceiling. Nee lay still for a while, then suddenly turned over. A soft whimper escaped her lips, as if she were afraid to disturb anyone. She turned her face inward, her shoulders trembling with longing for her mother. The longing did not burst forth violently, it smoldered quietly, gently, yet enough to make her fragile sleep restless. Diep heard it. She did not ask many questions, nor did she rush to soothe. She sat down by the bed, placed her hand lightly on Nee's back, and patted her slowly. Each steady motion was patient, free of any reproach. Diep made no distant promises, spoke no grand words of comfort. She simply leaned closer, her voice so soft it seemed to blend with the wind outside. "I'm here now. You can call me Mom, so you won't miss her so much." The words were as light as the kitchen smoke earlier that day, fragile and unhurried. Yet it was that very gentleness that spread, quietly soaking into the stillness of the room. Nee gradually stopped crying, her breathing evening out. In that moment, the small house seemed warmer, not from the stove's fire, but from a quiet sense of peace, deep and subtle, settling silently in the heart. Beyond caring for me, Diep also carried very ordinary worries on her shoulders, quiet and unspoken, much like who she was. Every meal in the small house was carefully planned in advance. She was used to standing for a long time in front of the food basket, thinking about what to cook that day so it would be filling, economical, and still warm enough for me. The little money she had was neatly set aside and divided into portions, some for rice, some for firewood, some saved for emergencies in case the child fell ill. There was no abundance to spend freely, yet there was never a meal where Diep let me eat carelessly or go without. The small kitchen became the place Diep was most attached to. There, she made use of rare spare moments to make dried banana jam. She carefully selected ripe bunches of bananas, choosing ones that were just right, not too soft, not too green. Diep patiently peeled them, sliced them thinly, and laid them out on old bamboo trays to dry. Her hands moved deftly, familiar with the work but never rushed. She knew that even a small mistake could ruin the whole batch, wasting all the effort she had put in. While working, Diep always set aside a few of the ripest bananas. She placed them in a separate corner, saving them for me to eat little by little. Those bananas were not for sale, not counted as profit. To Diep, that portion belonged to the child, a small sweetness in a life still full of hardship. When the jam was carefully packaged, Diep arranged each bundle neatly, ready to send them off to be sold. The money earned was not much, but it was enough to get by for a few more days, enough to keep the kitchen from feeling empty. The lives of the two of them held no days of abundance or luxury. Everything was balanced so tightly that every detail had to be calculated. Yet in that house, warmth was never absent. Simple meals still carried soft laughter. Cold nights still had a hand gently rubbing a back, quiet reminders spoken before sleep. Love did not need to be displayed, it quietly existed in every small thing Diep did each day. Elsewhere, James was also caught up in the rhythm of his own life, busy and full of pressure. He was occupied with work from early morning. Meetings with officials followed one after another, paperwork brought out and stacked on the table in piles. James listened attentively, answered every question clearly, and avoided no detail. He handled the procedures to expand his workshop, declaring every machine, every drying area, every smallest item. The work was far from easy. There were days when James had to stand for hours waiting for his turn, times when he had to return to add paperwork because of a single missing confirmation. But he did not complain, nor did he try to rush through things carelessly. James understood very well that if he wanted to do business for the long term, if he wanted the workshop to operate stably, everything had to follow the law from the very beginning. The hardship in front of him was only temporary, peace of mind later was what truly mattered. In the most exhausting moments, James still kept his patience. He carefully remembered every requirement, every new regulation, constantly reminding himself not to be careless. On his shoulders now was not only work, not only numbers and expansion plans. It was also responsibility for a home that needed stability, and the desire to build a solid foundation so that no one would have to live in hardship anymore. Amid stacks of documents and the dry exchanges of work, James carried a very clear thought in his heart: every effort today was aimed at a more peaceful future. He knew the path he had chosen was not easy, but he also understood that as long as each step was taken correctly, each task handled with full responsibility, that stability would come, slowly but surely, like the way afternoon once descended very slowly over that small house. At the end of the day, when the light had fully faded into a pale gray, Diep held Nee's hand and stepped out of the small house. The evening wind blew colder, carrying the damp scent of the earth and a sharp chill that signaled the year's end drawing near. In Diep's hand was a neatly packed basket of banana cakes, each small bag arranged carefully. Nee walked close beside her, her steps slow but steady, pulling her old jacket tighter against the wind. They stopped at a familiar street corner. No noise, no loud calls, Diep simply laid the cakes out quietly, while Nee stood beside her, carefully holding each small bag. When passers-by came by, the child bowed politely, her young voice still soft but clear as she offered the cakes. The motions repeated again and again, unhurried, unpressured. Some people stopped to buy, others smiled and walked on. Nee did not feel sad, nor did she show disappointment. She simply put the cakes away and waited for the next turn. The money they received was not much. Diep accepted it carefully, tucking it neatly into her pocket. To others, the amount might have seemed too small, but to the two of them, it was the reward of a whole day of patience and care. Each time another bag was sold, Nee glanced at Diep, her eyes lighting up for a brief moment. Diep said little, only a gentle nod, a very soft smile, but enough to reassure Nee. Darkness fell faster than expected. Street lights flickered on one by one, casting pale yellow circles onto the road. The wind grew colder, making Nee instinctively hunch her shoulders. Diep reached out and pulled the child closer, shielding her from the chill. In that moment, amid the thinning crowd at day's end, the bond between the two of them appeared quiet yet unmistakable. No words were needed, a firmer grip of the hand was enough to give each other strength. It was then that James appeared. From a distance, he had already recognized the mother and child standing by the roadside. The familiar figure, the small basket of cakes, and Nee standing close to Diep were images impossible to mistake. James stopped, his gaze lingering a little longer, not out of surprise, but out of a concern that had become habitual. He stepped closer, not speaking right away. Just a gentle look, enough for Diep to sense his presence. James asked a few brief questions, his voice low and unhurried. He did not ask much, nor did he make the atmosphere heavy. He glanced at the remaining cakes, at Nee's hands slightly cold from the wind, then turned to Diep. The offer to take them home was spoken very softly, as if it were only natural. Not a plan, not a polite invitation. It was late, the year-end cold was growing sharper, Tet was near, and everyone was tired after a long day. James understood that, and so did Diep. Nothing more needed to be said. Nee looked up at James, a familiar gaze mixed with trust. She said nothing, only tightened her grip on Diep's hand. Diep nodded and gathered the basket, her movements as calm and measured as always. As the three of them walked together, the road home seemed shorter. Their steady footsteps echoed on the cold pavement, blending with the pale yellow light along the way. No one spoke much on that stretch of road. Yet James's presence eased the emptiness of the space. The cold was still there, the weariness still there, but the sense of loneliness seemed to fall behind. In that simple moment, at the quiet end of the day, in the near-Tet cold, the way home felt warmer, not because the wind had softened, but because there was one more person walking alongside. They were not a complete family in the conventional sense people often imagine. There was no shared bloodline binding them by kinship, no vow spoken before a crowd, no wedding dress, no rings exchanged, no loud promises made to prove anything to the outside world. Their relationship formed quietly and slowly, almost without anyone noticing when it began, only that, over time, they found themselves standing beside one another without quite knowing how. Diep stepped into the role of a mother not out of obligation, nor because circumstances forced her to. She chose to stay, chose to care, chose to shoulder the heaviest responsibilities without seeking recognition. Each simple meal, each night awake beside the bed when Nee stirred from the cold, each evening spent helping the child study under a dim light, all of it was done with steady patience. Not for a day or two, but day after day, repeated quietly and consistently. In that silence, love grew, unnamed, yet undeniably present. Nee grew up within that embrace, lacking material abundance but never lacking the feeling of being protected. She learned politeness, learned patience, learned to cherish small things. Offering banana cakes to passers-by, receiving a few modest coins in return, these were not just acts of survival, but early lessons in effort and dignity. Nee did not call it hardship, because in her small world, having someone by her side, having a place to return to each night, was already enough. As for James, he stood in a position that was neither loud nor showy. He did not appear under any clearly defined title, nor did he try to assign himself a specific role. Yet his presence endured in its own quiet way, through questions asked at just the right moment, offers made without pressure, actions taken when needed and then gently withdrawn. James understood that some bonds do not need to be spoken aloud, simply being there when it matters is enough to make others feel at ease. The thread connecting Diep, Nee, and James was not woven from grand gestures. It was formed from small sacrifices, from placing responsibility above oneself, and from a sincere kind of love that asked for nothing in return. That thread could not be seen, yet it was stronger than many visible ties. It did not break easily, because each of them willingly held their part, without coercion, without calculation. They may not resemble other families, may lack outward completeness, may not fit neatly into named roles. But within that simplicity, they found a rare sense of peace. There, Diep did not have to strain to prove anything. Nee did not have to fear the coming of night. James did not have to stand outside the lives of those he cared for. Each of them had a quiet place, just enough to ensure they would not lose one another. And sometimes, it is families like these that truly become home. Not needing to be perfect, not needing to meet any standard, only warm enough to make one want to return after a long day. A place where each other's presence is itself a silent affirmation that, even if life remains full of imperfections, no one has to walk alone. Stay tuned for the next episode to discover what comes next and to follow the journey of love between James and Diep, as these quiet bonds continue to be tested and grow stronger over time.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Mình vừa gội cái tóc ra bởi vì mình cảm thấy nó khiến mình đau đầu quá. Thì chắc mình phải đi gội đầu thôi. Mình thấy cái tóc của mình nó bết lắm rồi. Mình thì vẫn đang làm video mọi người ạ. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều vì đã theo dõi và ủng hộ cho kênh của mình nhé. Tạm biệt mọi người.